Welcome everybody. This is a great topic. But first, let me tell you a little bit about coaching Agile journeys. Take a step back. Isaac and I were at a Lisa Atkins event a long time, like 3 or 4 years ago. And we just had this group, and the group was fizzling, but we thought having speakers would be great and sharing information. So we wanted to open it up to the world. And we put out a few all calls for people to join a separate segment, and we pushed forward. And here we are today with a bunch of really cool, exhilarating leaders, very open-minded, really good group of people, really great attendees. And at the end of the day, we're just volunteers. And we do have a mission and a vision. We're working on solidifying exactly what that is, but we really want to continue learning, growing, and helping others. We're committed not only for our own sake, because we learn something new from this every time we attend. This is really enlightening. We've done so many of these, and I think our main thing is we're dedicated to finding highly focused topics. I'll use that because that's really what it is, and the topics are very different. Like, you could go to our YouTube channel and just see the amount of topics we've covered, and even to this day, I still don't think we've covered the same one twice, and if we have, it's been a totally different spin on that topic. But we're trying to help guide development in everyone's Agile journeys. We talked about a big word that works for us is connecting. And anytime we find new information, or we find something we think is a really cool best practice, or something that someone's doing that's unique that could help others, we want to make that connection and maybe even connect you to a different network or a different audience. So let me move on here. So again, we're volunteers. We basically, Isaac mentioned it, we use a lot of freebie tools. It'd be nice to have tools that actually are a little stronger and a little bit better, but it costs money, and we come out of our own pockets to do this because we really believe in the mission, and we really want to help others. So if you ever find any kindness or generosity in your heart to contribute and keep these events moving forward, we'd greatly appreciate it. One other thing that we thought was really cool, kind of took us by storm. I'm not sure if you guys were here before, but we had Daniel Masick on, and he has New Tech USA. He is a leading author, Open Space Agility, The Culture Game, and I think the Agile Manager's Handbook. He's an amazing leader in this business, and he's a free thinker, and he has very great concepts, and challenging the status quo and finding new ways to work is really amazing. And he went out on a limb to recognize us here as being real Agile thought leaders, and all we're trying to do is just bring new things to the table. So it's an honor with these leaders that I work with be put into Daniel's Hall of Fame. So it's really cool, and I'm really glad to be here. And that was a pretty unique thing. He also put like Ron Jeffries and Martin Fowler on that list, to name a couple very big, high-profile names. So it's almost humbling to even have your name mentioned with people like that. Coming up, Chad Beyer, the Boat Rockers Toolkit. That's kind of interesting. This is something completely new. October 19th, 2018. Again, a different concept, a different topic, and probably some more really cool information because, again, we found another expert to connect you with. We've always done it that way. I usually said that's like nails on a chalkboard. How can we do it different or do it better? Or, how can we get people free thinking? So sometimes that's rocking the boat, and Chad's going to come in and explain some of his tips and probably best practices. Slight discomfort. I just said to a group today, I said, hey, look, sometimes to get to the next level, you got to be uncomfortable. If you're comfortable at any level doing anything, you're really not going to advance yourself. So you kind of got to step out of that comfort zone. And of course, today we have Heidi, the role of project management in an agile environment. This is probably met with a lot of open thinking or a different mindset. Some people are probably like, how in the world can you even mix those two? And of course, everybody's seen the infamous, we're looking for an agile project manager that has a PMP and understands these Scrum concepts. And you're thinking, wow, man, like that is like multi-personality disorder in this world that we work in. But you know what? Every company faces challenges like this. Every company has both an ecosystem of project management and an agile environment, or they aspire to eventually get to the agile promised land. And Heidi, I've known Heidi for a long time. She's awesome. She's been in these environments, and she's going to share with us some pretty cool knowledge where we can help bridge the gap, help use this for the best of its capability. And there really is a place where this could be leveraged. So at this point, thanks, Heidi, for doing this. This is really cool stuff. And I'll let you take it over from here.
Cool. Thanks so much. Yeah, I'm super excited about this topic, of course, because exactly like you said, right? It's so many things that come in an enterprise environment that really affect us today. So talking about the role of project management. And I put this here, like I changed the graphic today thinking, you know what, it's like artistry. So yeah, let's move forward and talk about artistry a little bit. So Jeff, thanks for introducing me. I just want to say a couple of words. Like, I'm Director of Agile Transformation at Tenable. I'm so grateful to have tons of experience in the community, but I never want to stop learning. And so these talks come upon my path of continuous learning and continuous improvement. And in that, I'd like to share something that I started to do, and this is my first public talk that I'm introducing this idea. And it goes back to the Hall of Fame that we talked about and Daniel Mezik's talk and the idea of open space agility. Everywhere I go, and when I was a coach, people were telling me, just be more prescriptive. People don't want to think. So you can just tell them how to run their retrospectives. You can basically tell them how to do Scrum in a really rigid way. We're going to measure story points. Oh, let's try to align every team's story points the same. If you force rigid practices, it's actually contrary to Agile. And that's not taking into consideration respect for people. And remember, we are people over process and tools. So it's actually not going to work. Just know that the more prescriptive and imposed you are having on the people, the less engaged and self-organizing the teams are going to be. So your agile transformation is going to stall and even run backwards. So if you have coaches in your org right now and they're pushing change and then they leave, people are just not going to be engaged. So you're not going to get what you want out of your agile transformation. It's a message that I can't state enough. So if you want to know more, just go to openspaceagility.com, agendashift.com. There's the what Jeff shared at New Tech USA. You can the thought leaders speaking about this are two people in particular that are co-authors of the Agile Manifesto. Ron Jeffries and Martin Fowler. And Daniel Mezik has all those people on his website at New Tech USA. So please check it out. But it's, leadership by invitation, pull, not push, is an idea that we really need to start thinking about today. Okay, so let's take a look at the poll. Who is here today? Okay, we've got a good number of Agile coaches, Scrum Masters, and project managers. And then we got business analysts and manager. Okay, great. This is going to help me guide my talk. Actually, I had like a ton of slides, and I thought I could probably do 2 hours of this. But no, let's just focus a little bit. Learn some potential issues that face people in coordination and project roles in transition to Agile. So let's say you're a project manager now, or you're coordinating things, and now we're moving to Agile from a plan-driven environment. New ways of communicating project and product information if you're used to those red, amber, green status reports and the Gantt charts and things. So I'll go through some of those. And then some new responsibilities that if you're a project manager, you can take on in an Agile environment. And this is totally nothing against the Agile Manifesto or something. Anything like that. So if you were around, I'd love to know those of you who were around when all this, who did the plan driven. I know Lori's one of them. I know a couple of the people in the audience are. We had like reams and reams of requirements, and then we had to document the requirements and the design. And by the time we implemented, it was probably like 9 to 12 months later. Oh, and by the way, you know, that took a really long time too, and people didn't really talk to each other. We had developers working pretty independently. We had this, of course, integration environment and UAT, and then all this testing that was going on, and then we deployed it, and then we thought, okay, the project is finally over. We'll accept, you know, the last 10% took like another 90% of the time. So that didn't work. I worked on projects where we did all this stuff and then nobody bought it at the end. That kind of sucked. In the middle, people were trying to really, the developers who care deeply about the product were discovering things along the way, and they try to basically stuff it in the requirements. And by the way, the people who asked for the requirements, it was like everything but the kitchen sink, because this is your one chance to get it in. So it created really bloated software. And of course, change is bad. We have to stick to the plan, and that was the overriding guidance here. So in Agile environment, of course, we think change is good and we learn from each iteration. So thank you for allowing us to change. We love this. I think it was like change for free, no worries there. But how do we track progress on this? Like this is, you know, seems easier, but how do we track progress on this where we're changing? And the product might evolve. I worked at one notable project where the person just came to me and said she just wanted to translate a one-page front and back travel request, really simple form, to a web page. That's it. It should have taken a couple of sprints at the most. Sat down with her, told her we're going to do it in Scrum, and showed her after the first iteration what we had done. And she's like, you know, I think I want you to pull in this guy's information because you know, we're logged in the system. So why does he have to retype his name? Yep, we can do that. We can pull it in from Outlook. The next time we met with her, she said something else like, oh, I forgot. The travel request is over 30 days. It goes to this different person, different department. To make a long story short, after more than a year and a half, she had exactly the application that she wanted, which is totally not what she'd asked for, right? That's great. The application was in use for 10 years before it was being retired. So that's some success story. But, you know, how could we predict this kind of stuff ahead of time? So I had people, and feedback I got when I was doing this talk the first couple of times were, you know, what about hybrid? But really, you can't just say we are waterfall or we're agile. Business operate in different contexts, and you have levels. If we talk about agile as being the ability to be responsive to your business context, then agile, there's no waterfall or agile. It's just sliding scale of how able you are to be responsive to your environment. So there are a few other things here that you might think about. Is your business more scope-driven or more deadline-driven? I know a lot of companies who work in the business-to-business arena that have to meet conference deadlines, and they want to promote at this conference or these big events. And so they are more deadline-driven rather than scope-driven. Let's get some MVP out there, and then let's present our new product at this conference or this event. Other ones just want to get the whole scope out there, right? Are we getting frequent feedback from our customers or no feedback? So look at these as like sliding scale of how each of these, right, how nimble you are to have frequent releases or less frequent releases. So it's not just waterfall or agile, okay? A lot of people say that's not agile, but remember your business context, okay? You may operate in an enterprise context that's not just a couple of Scrum teams anymore. And then you have so many other things to take into consideration. Business to business is also another one that has a completely different context, let's say, than business to consumer, companies like Google that deal directly with consumers, or things like Spotify. All right, next poll, if we're ready. What's your level of agile knowledge, if you wouldn't mind rating yourself?
I'll just encourage everybody in the chat. I've got a link to Slido. You can jump over there. You can use that for asking questions or quickly responding to the poll questions. So hop over there on that link to Slido and just stick that in there.
Cool, thanks. So most people seem like are at mostly 3 scores. And one that says basics. Cool, all right. So yes, please keep responding to that poll because I'd like to know, and then we'll move on. I don't want to wait though because we have tons of content to cover. So potential issues that face project managers in transition to Agile. So what do we have going on here? Well, first of all, the first thing that comes to mind is, are we focusing on projects anymore, or are we moving towards product? And this is the first thing that comes to my mind because people back then when we were doing all this up front and we released the software, maybe even on a CD, we couldn't go back and revise it afterwards. It really was perhaps a project, but that's not the way things operate anymore. We continually evolve our products now. So if your business is still in the state where they think that, maybe they have a SaaS product, but this is a project that has a start and an end, it might be a new concept for them to start thinking about a product thing. So we're going to talk about some of these things, but just know that this is a conflict with Agile and traditional project management. There is a defined start and end date for our project, but perhaps not a product, because you want to keep your product going and you want to keep iterating on it and you want to keep upgrading it over time, especially in that SaaS environment. We have usually in a project, we have specified a predefined outcome that usually has some scope with specific features to it, but in an Agile product, we evolve our outcome based on feedback. So there's a lot more things that we don't know about it. And then so on the left-hand project side, we're focused on delivering scope, delivered on time and within budget with that success criteria. But in Agile, hey, let's try to deliver what customers want. So I will start off by saying, this is why people have angst around the word Agile project manager. Some of the ideas underlying traditional project management are in fact in conflict with the realities, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing here for project managers to do. It's quite the opposite. There's so much opportunity here. That's what I would want to make sure that you guys know. So why, if you're a project manager, why should project managers care about Agile? These are the things that I've heard in my many years of doing this. All right, so we can't just simply plan, monitor, and control because we can't guarantee that's what they want, right? So that's not good enough. I do think that regardless of who you are, Agile values, practices, and principles can help any project or product be successful. Any other reasons why project managers should care about Agile? I love Lori's comment. It's the hardest mind shift transition from project to product.
For me, Heidi, as a former full-time project manager that moved into full-time Scrum Master, even before I was doing full-time Scrum, I was incorporating any and all little nuggets I could into my project teams because we were seeing that we could go faster, we could handle those never-ending change requests with the ability to pivot so much more quickly. And really found value in doing Agile in that waterfall world that we lived in. So
yeah, thanks. And here I see, thanks for sharing. Higher team engagement, more respect for people. That's awesome. Max value for resource, and I like that because we're not thinking about now the traditional way where we just allocate people like 30% here, 30% here, 40% here. That's all good. You actually do get more value of a cross-functional team that's fully allocated. Okay, so from this to that. So let's talk about from some plan-driven project and product management, and I'm going to use the / project product management because we're spanning two different worlds sometimes, and we still have companies that are trying to do both. So before, focus on the iron triangle, now we focus on business outcomes. I already talked about monitoring, controlling, and planning in detail, and assigning tasks to each person. So I'm not going to go in this just in depth. And by the way, the slides are going to be shared and this recording will be shared also. The idea here is before the project manager really did a lot more managing and controlling. But now a project manager, if you are a project manager, you step back and you coordinate and facilitate more. Okay? Any questions? All right. So why is it? Why do some Agilists fear PMO and project management? These are some things that I found, again, in my past, right? Legacy PMO experiences. It's command and control. Like, you must do this. I've had where teams had to post every single thing they did on Confluence in a really detailed way of what every single thing. Agilists are like, Agile doesn't require this sort of reporting. No, you just trust us to deliver. Like, we're going to give you something at the end of the sprint. So why do you want to know when each story or subtask is done? Like, that's just way too much inspection here. A lot of people have said, if you need a project manager or a PMO, you're doing Agile wrong. And lastly, Scrum is popular and never talks about a project manager role. In fact, they say we definitely don't need one. Any other ideas? You can either speak up or post them in the chat of why Agilists fear PMO and project management. No, I caught them all. Can't possibly catch them all. Feeling of restriction. We ask for due dates. Plan the work, work the plan. Got it. Okay, cool. All right. So look, Scrum teams share project management duties. Indeed, if you just have one Scrum team, you probably don't need a project manager on your Scrum team. The product owner manages the priorities, the team is getting the work done, and they manage their tasks. And of course, the Scrum Master is, guiding the team in that way. And so, yep, we're definitely delivering something regularly on a cadence. So there's no need to have a project manager in here. But let me share a scenario with you. What do you do in a case like this? Now, this is only a few teams. What if you've got 12 or 14 or 20 teams, and I had up to 40 teams? They were 40 Agile teams with one goal. Now, how do we report progress? So, okay, we each have a Scrum Master inside of a team, but what do we do at the holistic level? How do we gather this information together? So think about that. How do we report progress? How do we coordinate across teams, and what skill sets are needed to have this level of coordination and communicate dependencies and risks without things falling through the cracks? What if your teams aren't all cross-functional, like some are platform teams or component teams, or they're not all using Scrum? What if some are waterfall teams or Kanban teams? And what if teams have more than one backlog or multiple stakeholders? It gets really, really challenging to coordinate this kind of large product or project effort. And so I really love Johanna Rothman's quote on this. Scaled Agile is simply program management, which indeed it is. It's not anti-agile if you need to coordinate at all. Coordination skill is not anti-agile. So it doesn't really matter what you call the person, right? It could be a project manager, could be a product manager, or whatever else you call it. Some people call that skill an agile leader, or sometimes it's a Scrum Master who has multiple teams that does that coordination. But here are my observations when organizations start Agile. All of a sudden, we've split a bunch of teams into Scrum teams, but we don't have any multi-team structure in place, so nobody knows that, nobody thinks of that level of coordination. But people still want to see progress towards a goal or vision, even if they understand that it's going to evolve with some feedback, right? So now we've got a bunch of teams working together, but no coordination. Few people actually are considering end-to-end delivery. So sometimes teams cannot deploy, or we need some installation software, some other thing that needs to happen outside. What about sales and marketing? When do we need to bring them into the picture? And so few people have actually considered this when organizations start Agile. They just think it's something within IT. And so it should be very, very focused. But actually, there are so many opportunities for people with coordination skills. The org has all of a sudden no idea how to deliver software once they go Agile. And if you think I'm exaggerating, I worked at a place that I think it was like 3 years on a software project that they were trying to do an Agile transformation at the same time. They never actually delivered that project. So that was a totally failed project. So if you think coaching and coordination is a skill that you don't have, if you don't have money for that, then I wonder what we're going to be able to deliver. And because people oftentimes focus on the Scrum team itself, there's just mass confusion and angst about roles and responsibilities. So if you could help in this way, whatever your role is, and you see some of these same things, there are so many opportunities to make a difference. Confusion between what does a Scrum Master do, and what's the difference between what the Scrum Master is doing, the engineering manager, and the project manager, if you have one here. And so just mass confusion. So I'd like to give you some tips to help. Okay. Does anyone have these issues? If you're a project manager, what do I do now? We're going to Agile. What kind of status report do I report on now? Because teams are telling me to stay out of their scrums and not to report on subtasks and stories. They're just going to show me at the end of the sprint. When will it be done? And if I can't push a date or a scope or a budget as a measure of success, then what am I supposed to be doing now, right? And of course, that never-ending project versus product focus. So I will say we can do better at setting people up for success when we transition to Agile. There are benefits of Agile project and product management. We should have a lot of transparency into the actual status. I worked at a place where I saw that the teams had not closed out the previous sprints because they had open defects in them. So the previous sprints were all open. I couldn't figure out where we were at. It's a mess. And I said, I just can't even visualize where we're at. Are we actually going to get to our goal on time? And we had like this EA and GA release set, general availability and early availability. And the person looked at me, by the way, came from a waterfall environment. She goes, that's because this is an Agile project. And I'm like, no, this is not the reason. You should have even more transparency. Like, let's do that. Okay, so less manual reporting angst because the teams are going to be reporting it using their online tools. If we deliver regularly in an environment that's similar to production, we should have reduced risks and, of course, faster ROI because we should be delivering something smaller. And, of course, lastly, the higher customer satisfaction, hopefully. Okay, some new responsibilities. So I told you about all this angst. All right. So if you are, is anyone here do budgeting as part of their Agile? I guess a lot of people are Agile coaches, so maybe not. Anyone in charge of budgeting? Even if you're not, though, we want to fund full-time, stable, cross-functional teams that have ownership over an area. That way we can use the team run rate for budgeting and bring the work to the team. One of the things I have seen is that all of a sudden we think we can just add more developers and the team grows and grows. Well, all of a sudden you don't have enough product owner person to spread around, or the Scrum Master, the team is too big to get anything done, or if you do have QA on your team, there's too few QA to handle all the things that the developers. So you need to balance that out. We need to hire for cross-functional skill sets and make sure that the team is balanced. And so the note here at the bottom, we want to scale small cross-functional teams to deliver a business outcome. Make sure that whatever you do, you're scaling teams. Don't add too many of one skill set or another. So that's where you can really make a difference if you have a voice into how we hire these teams. One of the major things I've seen is just we believe that developers are the only producers of value, and we hire a bunch of developers, and then all of a sudden we realize, oh, too late. Oh, gosh, we only have a quarter of a PO available for this team and no Scrum Master. Oh, well, we'll get some QA later that we have to train up, but think of it holistically as a whole team who can deliver the business outcome. All right, for those project managers, no more red, amber, green status or critical path. This one made me laugh when I was putting it together. It's like, project status is green. The benefits are certainly red, but don't worry, we're on schedule and we've got all the resourcing and the budget, and risks are green. Got some issues, so it's like, wait a minute. How can you be sure if the product isn't going to have any of the benefits that it's still green? Like that made me laugh yesterday when I was putting this together. So less manual reporting. Iterations are done and tested. No more of this 33% done and 9% done on each task level. All right, we're done or not, and that makes it much more easy to talk about these, right? So we've got the backlog. So progress is visible, even if it evolves. So I'm going to tell you how to get there. Show the value of transparency and regular progress. Too many times we forget about this. The progress should be self-evident, and when it is, we gain trust and we reduce risk and unknowns. So if you're not following this kind of hierarchical structure, and oh yeah, by the way, it might be time soon to put up our question about what kind of Agile tools you use, because I use a lot of screen captures from Jira because it's the one I use right now and it's pretty popular. What I have seen is that people just kind of like ad hoc do work. It's not really, the stories are not tied to epics, and the epics aren't really tied to a fixed version or an initiative. Progress should be very easily visible as long as you're using the tools the way they were intended. A correct hierarchy for the roll-up, add a fixed version if you want to track that. Items are done and tested. So to go back to the place I work where they had many sprints open. They weren't actually testing inside the sprint. No surprise that was an outsourced QA firm, and they just thought it was way too difficult to test inside of the sprint and close out all the defects. So they were doing it sprints and sprints behind. That does not help us. That's not the Agile way of working. Agile way of working assumes that we have something done and tested at the end of a time frame. This is the way that we can actually reduce a lot of risk. We're going to close out as many defects as possible in the sprint. And lastly, I wrote a whole article about this on LinkedIn because I've also had the experience where they want teams to be really predictable, but the teams are working on 5 different projects at a time. So if you can imagine, they couldn't be predictable to deliver any of the projects because each of them, they were just working on a very small portion of time in a very ad hoc way. And so it's like, your forecasting is not going to work. Make sure the teams focus on one thing after another sequentially, and you'll be delivering sooner. That's a really hard mindset shift to do, but it's really, really important. If you want to see measurable progress and see the value of this, that you just focus teams on one thing at a time, or minimal things at a time. Okay, and minimize. This goes for the team too, right? Focus on one story at a time from a personal level, the minimum number of epics at a time in a sprint, and that's where you'll get the greatness of measurable progress, which will, again, it will increase trust and it reduced risk and unknowns. Even when you think about it, if you're working on 5 different projects, the code base is, it's just so, the changes in the code are so massive, right? So reduce risk, focus on one thing, get it out sooner. Next thing, I don't think anyone in this call has probably had someone not ask them, hey, when will it be done? But if you're a project manager, this is a really challenging question now, right? How on earth can I tell them it's going to be done if I can't plan the entire thing to the task level, and plus we're changing things along the way? So like, this is totally unfair from a project management perspective. Like, how can I be successful? And how can I focus them away from the iron triangle, the scope, budget, date, to something else entirely? So that's what we'll go through next. What does done even mean? Honestly, like, take a step back and ask yourself, does everybody in the team and in the organization have a shared understanding of what done even means? Because if you don't know, you're never going to get there. So create a shared understanding of what done looks like. And I think this could help for any role. If you don't have that, create it. Have that discussion and document it. How are we going to measure success? Is it just release and forget, or are we hoping for some business outcome? And the thing that I always want to focus on, remember that a high-performing team, for those of you who've joined us before, we talk about this, is like they feel that they come to work for a purpose, they have a vision, a mission. Communicate the vision and goals and criteria for success clearly to them, so when we show up every day for work, now we understand what the vision for the product is, and we have that in mind. And in distributed environments too, it's super important to have that vision and goals restated all the time. Okay, so if they are not written down, get a shared understanding of what done means for your project or your product or your iteration or whatever it is. If it's a very large effort, break the work down into phases, outcomes, or measurable goals. Remember, we want to show some measurable progress, and that's the way to do it, is to break it down into phases. Is it something that you want to call your minimally viable release, or an early access, or beta, or whatever you do decide to call it, but keep it small and measurable. If you have the situation where you need to consider a fixed deadline, then can we limit scope inside each feature? So ask yourself, what's the minimum that I can deliver? Instead of asking yourself, how much can I get in? What's the minimum that we can stick in this? Because that changes the conversation around the fixed scope, fixed deadline. What's the minimum that we really, really need? And lastly, don't fall into the trap of thinking that adding more people will get you there faster. If you simply enable a stable team and remove their impediments, you're going to actually get there a lot sooner. All right, so new ways of communicating project information. Hang on, let me see who's answered the poll for the tools. All right, so I don't think anyone's answered the poll yet. Oh, 9 women can't have a baby in a month. That's the favorite way, right? Okay, so I'm going to move on, and nobody's answered the poll, but that'd be helpful. But
no, we've got 17 responses. You might need to refresh, possibly.
Oh, sorry. Okay, thanks. I don't know why it's not showing up.
Jira is a strong winner right now. We've got about 20 responses.
Oh, good. Okay, awesome. Thanks. And maybe it's my privacy badge or not. Okay. All right. Thank you for that. I just still don't see it for some reason. Okay. Well, Jira, that's a good news because all my screenshots here are from Jira. So here, let's talk about the backlog. I'm going to show you what I did, and I pulled this data into Excel. The team started with a very small backlog here, and they could do about 20 points. I just have it averaged to be 20 points a sprint, and you can see here where the team, the green overlay is the, oops, sorry about that. The green overlay is the team burn up. Okay, so that's this green overlay right here. The team started with a backlog, and they added items to their backlog as they went along, and they refined their backlog, and they were working along. And here is the customer feedback. And so I highlighted customer feedback in yellow, so I actually tagged it. So you can see here, right? We thought we were going to be done at sprint 8, but due to customer feedback, I can now visually show that why we ended in sprint 11 instead of sprint 8. And so this is a really visual way of showing, like, hey, this is a good thing. We got customer feedback, but therefore we're going to be now delivering after sprint 11 instead of sprint 8, the things that we thought we were going to deliver. Okay, so that's a conversation that happens. Capture customer feedback. Actually, you can tag this inside of Jira with a label if you want. And so that makes it super easy. And so this is just one way of showing, hey, feedback is good. Here's what the impact is. I know all of you who love Jira probably have seen this fix. It's a version report inside of Jira. But so you can actually, if you tag your items with the fixed version, now you can show the cumulative burn down and burn up. And this chart, although it seems very simple, has a ton of information here. It tells you here, if you were to roll over on this slide, how many % of unestimated issues you have. It shows you the completed story points, and so you can see them burning up. At the same time, we did we would burn down because we would refine the backlog. And so for this release, you can see the continual refining of the backlog, and it gives you this kind of like forecast of when they thought it would be done. And of course, here are the total story points, and you can actually change this to the story count instead. If you're not using story points, just use story count or issue count. And what this does, it just gives you a forecast. The caveat being that inside of Jira itself, if you have a backlog that is not in story pointed, it's going to say here, let's say 30% unestimated issues in the backlog, but it won't take that into consideration when it gives this end date. So, but it is a really visual way of showing this is what we know right now, and this is when we think we were going to get done. And also gain acceptance of that cone of uncertainty, right? This is what we kind of know right now, and it's going to generate this data based on the team's velocity. Okay. All right, lovely, more things that I added. So you can't always have one chart for everything, right? But multiple charts can show the whole picture. And so this is what I've done at previous places, is to show if we have a release coming up, this is how many stories are complete in this release. If you care about the backlog and you want to work on some more story pointing your backlog, and let's say you have 2 to 3 sprints of points in there, you can see like, okay, this has only got 18 stories out of 98 in future sprints. So maybe we want to work on that and get to like a happy medium where we've got 2 to 3 sprints ahead pointed out. And so it's up to you. There's none of these is anything like magical in its own, but now you can get a whole picture of how it's going. Look at the number of epics in this release, for example. We've got 30 closed and 20 open and 5 in progress. That seems like a pretty good effort going on. You can imagine if we had, as this is on the epic level, so if you had 15 epics in progress, you might want to say, okay, guys, what epics can we close out now? Remember, we want to minimize our epics in progress. So let's close out the epics so we can show some more progress on this release, right? And the created versus resolved for this release is interesting because if you think that you've got everything in your release and people keep adding issues, or maybe it's even the product owner, right? So created issues 11, resolved issues 4. If you think that you are going to burn down and get this 82 to 92% by the end of next week, but people still keep adding issues, whether they be defects or something else, just know that that might affect your day. So you can see hopefully how multiple things together now can start putting together a more full picture of what's actually going on. That's Lori's personal favorite chart. I love that. Okay, so a few other things, right? What if you had a release on the 7th of August and then you've got like 3 major critical bugs the next day? I think that would say something to you. So the calendar view is also useful for what are the days when issues get created and did that tag to a major release, and you can actually set it to indicate whether you had a release that day. So it would basically say the name of the release here and then the 3 critical defects that came in the next day. Also sharing very visually like, hey, might be something related to that. I like the average time in review in the sprint because you can now refocus people on, wow, okay, we're trying to get stuff done, but this code review has taken 11 days. Like, how is that? Like, obviously, let's get moving on that. So these are just ways that you can coordinate and bring value inside of your team to say, let's focus on the right things, right? Let's focus on reducing work in progress, investigating issues, and all these coordination things that together show a picture. Any questions? Oh, actionable Agile. Actually, I've got the website up, and I'm going to show a little screenshot of something similar to the actionable Agile in just a second. So let me talk to you about Jira Portfolio because it's a plugin for Jira, and maybe some of you haven't seen this, but it can forecast, right? It's not a plan, even though it's called a portfolio plan. It's really a forecast, right? It allows you to go in and give it the default values for epics. So let's say my average epic has got 5 stories. You can basically say now that the average story has got 5 points, so now I know the average epic is going to be 25 story points. Anyway, you can go in there and you can configure that inside of Jira Portfolio, and therefore you can have only epics in your backlog and unestimated stories, and it will lay it out for you in that timeline. So it's stuff that's really useful if you just want to use the rolling wave planning and you know there's epics out there. So Jira Portfolio is really a good tool as well. All right, so here is something akin to the actionable agile. And if you have date-driven goals, for example, here's the scatter plot for something. And if you have enough data, you could actually pretty accurately predict and say, like, look, 73% of our items take 7 days or less. So now you can get really accurate forecasting for your for what's going on, right? We want to, so this particular slide shows the scatter plot, but I really want to talk to you about date-driven goals, because on a date-driven goal, we want to focus on the highest priority item and consider cutting scope inside of each feature. Really, when you're talking about cycle time, you want to track dependencies and find ways to resolve or remove them, either get a skill set inside of your team or have somebody, I don't want to use the word aggressively, but tracking those, and you might want to use the Jira charts for that to make sure things like the code review are getting taken care of immediately. The key thing I want to focus, if you have a date-driven goal, is don't use fuzzy math. Use actual data as soon as possible to validate your assumptions. Okay, so go back and continually reevaluate. And for one of the things that I worked on in the past, we had actually predicted that the average epic was something like 35 story points, but we went back, actually the size over time had decreased. And so we were able to reduce it to 15 story points. This is just one way of saying use actual data as soon as you can. Don't go forth without reevaluating the data that you had in the beginning of the project, because things change across time. But yes, you could actually say with the scatter plot and the actionable agile plugin, based on past data, we can probably meet this state with 73% certainty, assuming, of course, that it didn't change. If we have time in the end, by the way, I'll pull up the actionable agile website, and hold on. Let me see if I have it open right now. You guys see that? So actionableagile.com/ and there's a demo there, so you can go and look at some of these stuff for yourself. Cool. All right. So one thing we haven't talked about is, I know we talked about it briefly, but not since then. What if you have a really large initiative or a product or a large project? I mean, you got suppliers, and I got this diagram from Henrik Nyberg. Like, you need some coordination to happen. So a project manager or agile leader, and again, the name is unimportant. It's the skill set that's important. Who is going to bring everybody together? The goals, the milestones, the value proposition, the definition of done, keeping all these things visible to everybody is just so key. And so that's a skill set that's really sorely needed in most projects that I've been on and businesses that I've been in. Okay, so don't forget questions. I will definitely not forget the questions. Another thing you can do is show real risks, okay? If you have this skill and nobody's doing it, why don't you share the real risks? The team is not testing inside a sprint and fixing most or all defects along the way. So when we go to UAT, all these defects are going to appear and we'll be late to UAT, for example. Team doesn't have everything it needs to get something done. The team has unresolved dependencies and so forth, okay? So I actually created a little chart. Offer up solutions, right? This is just a very small example. So an agile good practice might be product owners dedicated full time, but we don't want to just say that. Oh, that's not agile. We don't have a product owner. He has 4 teams. Let's say product owner is unavailable to collaborate. That is causing delays while the team is waiting to get questions answered. And we have a team proposal to improve, and that would be focus the current product owner on the highest priority initiatives. Okay, so we have issues for sure. Focus people on offering up solutions as a way to get them to think about the impact and the risks that we're currently experiencing. And again, doesn't matter what title you have when you do this, but the need is still here for those things to happen for people who might not be thinking about them every single day. Focus on the risks and impact and your proposal to improve. Another thing you could do is elevate some common themes from retrospective. Who is doing this if you have multiple teams? Again, I've just seen places where the teams are complaining about environments are not available, or I don't have the data that I need, and it's across maybe 10, 20, or 30 or more teams. but nobody is elevating this at the level that they could. So the enterprise impact is not known because they just kind of die there. It's like, oh, well, I can't help that inside of my team. What if you were that person who could find those common themes and elevate them and get them added to the organizational backlog for as high priority items? Another way would be to, and I don't have a graph right here for that, but show the impact of that too, because that changes the conversation to say, hey, we were delayed for 15 days or 200 hours this past month because of XYZ thing, and that really changes the conversation when you can make those kind of things visible. So bring organizational impediments to light and track them on an impediments and risks board. Okay, so I do have some resources here that I've used when I was creating this, and of course along with many other things. So I want to pause. I have a few more slides if we have some time, but I'd like to stop and ask for questions. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a second.
Excellent, Heidi. Well, I can guide us through some of those questions for you. I'll actually throw up a screen so we can see them on the big screen here. But number one question, we got several upvotes for that, is what do you do in an environment where Agile is used, but the PMO and C-level still want green, yellow, and red dashboards? So we're going Agile, but I still want dashboards.
Yeah, that's a great conversation to bring up. I was in this situation before, and so I would try to refocus them on the value of what you're delivered. So I guess without knowing more, it's going to be tough, right? What do those green, yellow, and red actually mean? Do you have influence into what green, yellow, and red status actually means? And are those risks, let's say that I mentioned here, if they are a risk on your team, are the right risks being brought up? In the particular case where I had a PMO that was, we had a lot of things going on, I actually did a futurespective. Luckily, I was able to do this futurespective at the level where I was doing it with engineering leads and Scrum Masters and product owners. And in each of them, we came up with like action items, but you'd be surprised what the action items were. It was something like everybody on the same chat system. The risk is that the product owner is oversubscribed, that we're not co-located. And those top 7 items, though, we actually took those to the PMO, and we were able to work with the PMO and get them resolved. And so one of the risks was we don't have enough QA people. And so I think if you work and perhaps bring the PMO in, maybe do a retrospective. Again, it's kind of hard for me to know what kind of statuses you're being asked to report now. But if it's like mine, maybe you could get some traction by talking to the PMO about what the actual risks are versus the risks that they're reporting, and focus them on the at the end of every sprint goal. But I'd like to know: are they asking for status inside of a sprint, or if someone wants to speak up or put it in the chat, are they asking for status inside the sprint or just at the end of every sprint?
And anybody could add feedback to clarify this.
Yeah.
In the chat, we have red, yellow, green means nothing if you're scope driven. Into the sprint and Jim's experience. Yeah.
So, again, from my perspective, the teams didn't have what they needed to get stuff done inside of the sprint. And so that's where, going back to the chart of, and actually I did that same chart in that organization too. Hey, you're talking about whether the team is able to deliver at the end of their sprint, but actually we have an oversubscribed product owner. We're not co-located. We have a lack of QA. So like, how can we be successful? So try to refocus them on the actual risks, and maybe you'll get some traction there.
There we go. Okay. So next question, asking with the PM hat on, do the members in the team need to be on full time, or can they be utilized in other projects at the same time?
That is a great question. So I would say an Agile team has members that are full time, but not there's roles called orbiting roles. And so if there is a case where, let's say, a documentation person or a legal person, it definitely wouldn't have enough work to do inside the team, then talk about those as orbital roles. But what needs to happen in order for the team to work on it? If the team is going to be constrained and needs that work to happen, then how will that work happen? Is it going to happen before the sprint? And can the dependency be resolved before the sprint? So if there's any way for it to happen before the sprint, then get that dependency resolved. Otherwise, I would say bring that person in the sprint. every team is so very different, so I would take that on a team-by-team basis. As an example, I had one team that had services, and they actually had one person support two different teams, so they were 50-50 on that. But each Scrum team knew that this particular person, Bill, for example, was that point person for the services, and that worked fine for them. Previously, they had him outside the team, and they actually brought him inside the team. So I'd say it's a little bit of inspect and adapt. What I would be really clear to say, though, is people shouldn't be allocated 100%, especially for knowledge work. So as long as you're careful with that, I would just try to work it out with the team and let the team tell you what they need.
Excellent. Okay. Got another one. How do you recommend talking to stakeholders who are simply being unreasonable? So they're demanding a plan that requires crunch. And so I would guess that means, they're saying, we expect you to move mountains and make miracles happen.
So, right.
How would you talk to them?
Yeah, work a lot of overtime. And so an example where this happened to me in the past was the team was working 16-hour days to get stuff done. Sadly, they had many, many other issues, so it wasn't in their control. In fact, the more they worked, the more other teams changed things inside the sprint and the more defects they created. So again, I would focus them on the real risk. The real risk, if the team is working overtime, lots of things. The team is going to quit. The team is going to actually create more defects. And what is the cause of them having to work so much overtime? Was it improper discovery work or planning? And then let's say that the team didn't do, even imagining that it was in their control, they didn't do proper discovery work to figure that out ahead of time. Well, then that goes into a retrospective. So, we can't solve every business problem. And people are not robots. So I would try to focus them on the risk of people leaving for sure. And, the other things I mentioned.
Yeah, great answer. Heidi, here's another one. What is the greatest value you see from effective storytelling? So you showed some slides with images. So scope management, relationship, vision, feedback. What are the greatest value you see from telling good stories?
Wow, I think telling a good story, especially with visuals like that, really opens up the conversation where people just get it. And I've seen it so much in my past where I would go to a wiki page and I would see basically tables and tables of information and no visuals. And you think about it, you just look at it and I can't even grok this. It's the end of the day. What the heck's going on with this? I can't read it all. I don't get it. Put a simple visual up. And if you go back to the pie chart where I had, these are the number of epics in progress, these are the number of epics to do, and it just gives a really easy visual. And so it tells a much better story in my book with very, very few words or no words at all.
Great. Okay. We'll probably get one, maybe two more in here real quick because I want you to have time to wrap up with final thoughts. Should a project manager and or PMO lean agile health metrics help bridge the gap in drawing a single source picture for directors and managers to understand? Does that make sense?
They could. Let me. Can you just display that question?
I can. Yep, I'll throw it up there so you can see it. Share my screen. Yep.
Should a project manager and or PMO learn agile health metrics, then bridge the gap in drawing a single? I think so. I have other slides here. It seems like the person was had this idea, but I have a whole other section. This talk just went way, way too long on what a PMO could do when they're transitioning to agile, and basically, turning from command and control to those health metrics. So part of what, let me see. Let me just share this with you real quick. So my cat gets a starring role again because he's just got that face. So, so metrics that make sense, right? Align them with the organizational portfolio and team goals. And of course, I've seen way too many people try to measure individuals like points per developer or points per developer per week or something. I even had one guy say, we do 4 points per day. Just the key thing to know about metrics is that they should be actionable, easy to collect and understand, and small in number. So you wouldn't want 15 different kinds of metrics. And then about the time they become useful to you, you might want to re-examine them because people always find ways around them. And so some things to look at, right? What is your goal? If it's predictable releases, then you might want to start looking at average lead and cycle time and throughput and rework, because those are the things that really affect it. So definitely could help in that way.
Excellent. We've got a couple more questions, but I do want to give you time to wrap up. We're 5 minutes till, if you want to do that, or.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I'll take, we have time for another question. And then,
Great,
yes.
Great. Yep, I'll give you another one here. How do you provide charts and images to tell a story when you don't have team-based data because it's either a new team or a new mixture of the members on the team?
Yeah, great question. Those metrics are not there from day one. And so I would just set the expectation you can't have those on day one, and I would just wait until they're a couple sprints in. In the meantime, I think you could, hopefully people would understand that this is a new team. We have a new mix of people. We're putting together some things. These are the kind of things we're looking at right now. Yeah, I think you can get some early thoughts around it. Does your team have everything it needs? Are the environments all set up? So start talking to the team about those things early on, and figure out those things that you want to capture with the team's input.
Very good. Do you want to take one more? We have one more that got one upvote, so you can get all the one votes if you want.
That's totally fine, sure.
Okay, great. Last one then. I think the Scrum Master Project Manager to go with an Agile approach with actually, I don't understand the question. Hold on. I think the Scrum Master Project Manager go with an Agile approach with stakeholders, with reporting, by starting with priorities. I don't understand it. I'm sorry. Let's ask the other question that has 0 upvotes. Can a PM be successful in doing all this in an Agile environment if they haven't trained, learned, or educated themselves on Agile or an Agile framework?
If they haven't?
If they have not, right. How can a PM, can they be successful in an Agile environment without that kind of training?
No, I think if people need training for sure on it. This was just like an hour of time to share the things that you can do. But yeah, I think the basic understanding has to be there that we want to move not from allocating people like at small fractions across many projects, but focus them on one thing. So I think it might be a mindset shift. So I couldn't expect them to be successful without training.
All right, great. I think that's all for our questions.
Cool. Anyone else have a question? Cool. So yes, our sessions are posted up there. The slides will be shared, and I'll add the metrics slide to the end. If you have any questions, I'm also on social media, on Twitter. We're on coachingagilejourneys.com. Hopefully you'll join the future ones, and hopefully you found this time valuable.
Thanks, Heidi.
Yeah. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks so much, Heidi. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks, Heidi. Thanks,
Thanks, Heidi.
everybody.
Thanks for coming all.